Hi everyone, I'm going to talk to you for the next 10 minutes about the three foundations of reading comprehension that most parents miss. So many parents will come to me and say, my child is reading the words on the page, they can read fluently, but they're not taking in what they're reading. They might not be taking in any of it, or actually they are taking in some, especially that sort of easy retrieval, retelling of the story. But actually, if I'm asking deeper meaning questions, like inference questions, reading between the lines, different types of vocabulary questions, they really can't answer them. And quite often parents have been using CGP books or comprehension exercises, comprehension worksheets, homework received from school to try and help their child develop their comprehension. Or they might have been asking them questions when they're reading as well. So they might have been saying to them, can you tell me what's happened in the story so far? Why do you think that's happened? And so on. All of those are great strategies, and I don't want to put them down because they all have a place. But essentially, comprehension is a really complex skill to develop. You cannot you cannot teach comprehension by drilling it. It's not built just by asking questions over and over again. So, for example, if you want to practice your times tables, you can drill times tables and you can learn them that way. You can't do that with comprehension. Every time a child then has access to a different text, they need a different set of skills. So, yes, there are some comprehension skills that apply and will help them, but without some other foundational skills, they still can't answer the questions about the text. So, really, questions can only check understanding, they don't build it. Real comprehension starts long before the questions. Okay, so it's made up of these three components, and we make sure that all of our comprehension group sessions, all of these three components are always integrated. But there's lots that you can do at home to make sure that this is the case as well. So, vocabulary is a really key component for comprehension to be effective. Background knowledge, and we'll talk about these things in a bit more detail in a moment, and thinking like a reader. So actually, all of these three things are built way before the child actually opens the book and tries to answer the questions. Reading enjoyment is unfortunately at a 20-year low, which is really quite sad. And quite often parents will come to me and say, well, they can read fluently, but they're not enjoying what they're reading. And then quite often I then think, okay, there's something with comprehension there, because actually, if you can't really understand the text, you're not going to be enjoying it. So let's look at vocabulary. You can't understand a sentence full of words you don't know. And actually, Oxford University Press did a study that shows 4 in 10 children are behind on their vocabulary development and acquisition at the moment. And this doesn't just affect English, as you know, it affects all of the subjects. It's actually one of the main reasons parents come to us, is they will say, well, English was never their strong suit, reading and writing was never their strong suit. But actually, now we've noticed it's affecting every English. It's now affecting maths. It's affecting their ability to join in on history and geography and all of those other subjects. And here's a really nice example for you. So this is what reading feels like without understanding the words. So let's imagine you had to answer questions on that sentence based on the words that have been blanked out there because you don't understand those words. You actually need around 95% knowledge of the vocabulary you're reading in a text. You can't start inferring what every single word means. Yes, there might be one or two in a text where you can have a good guess based on reading around it what it means, but if there are lots of words you don't understand, you don't really have a chance. And there's a really key point here, and I always say this to parents that come to us and say, well, how can I make sure what we're doing at home is beneficial as well? Books beat conversation for rare words. Children don't hear the same syntax in a conversation that they do through a story, through a book. Now, that doesn't mean your child needs to be reading all the time. It means that you need to be reading them to them a lot, and they need to be exposed to different types of text a lot. Essentially, audiobooks would be my one recommendation there. If you haven't got a Tony or a Yoto player, an Alexa, something your child can listen to audiobooks on, I would say is vital. It really, it really motivates them as well because they can be completely independent. If they can't read fluently yet, they can be independent in type choosing the audiobooks that they want to listen to. And actually, the syntax in stories is amazing for vocabulary development. So even if they don't like reading a physical text themselves, listening to you read or listening to audiobooks is almost more important for comprehension development than it is them reading independently. And actually, a child's listening comprehension doesn't catch up with their reading comprehension sorry, I got that the wrong way round. A child's reading comprehension doesn't catch up with their listening comprehension until they are about 12 or 13. So actually what your child can understand when they read is very different to what your child can understand when they are listening. Okay, and a really important one, background knowledge. So the words haven't changed, but their knowledge has. If you have a background knowledge on the text that you are reading, anything in it, all different elements of it, it's going to improve your comprehension of it. Knowledge fills in the gaps. You can't infer what you've never met. So we've got two examples here. Let's say, for example, your child is reading a text all about India. They know nothing about India. They don't know where it is on the world map. They don't know how it's the same as your country or the country that they live in, and they don't know how it's different. They don't know what the weather's like there. They don't know what people eat there. They don't understand what maybe different religions there might be there and how that compares to where they live. They don't understand how the culture might be completely different. Because of that, when they're reading a story set in India, their comprehension is going to be so much more limited than a child who does know all of those things. And that child who does, maybe a child who lives in India, for example, is going to have a much better comprehension of that situation. It sounds really obvious when you say it like that, but this can apply to so many different contexts and so many different things that you're reading about. There was actually a study that was done in 1998 about basketball in America, and basically they took a load of children who were really poor readers. They really struggled with reading fluency and comprehension, but they all loved basketball. They were brilliant at basketball. And then you had a group of children who were brilliant readers, but they'd never played basketball. They had a very limited knowledge on basketball. And actually, they did a reading test, comprehension test with them based on a text all about basketball. And as I'm sure you can guess, the poorer readers, or the typically poorer readers, absolutely smashed it and outshone all of the good readers because their knowledge around basketball was so much better that their comprehension could build on that foundational block. And the third thing that I think is really key is our actual comprehension skills and thinking like a reader. This is the sort of thing that a worksheet or a CGT book will help you with, but it's the way it's used that is going to be the key here. So if you are literally getting your child to sit the paper, sit the worksheet, do it, and then go through the answers, they're not going to make any progress. It's all about teaching them to think like a reader, and there are certain skills that will help them to be able to do that. And I've got these recapped here. So skilled readers don't just read, they think out loud. So when you're reading a text, you're not just reading the words, you've got all of these thoughts going on in your head constantly about, well, what does that word tell me? What's that person thinking? How does that link to this? This reminds me of this. This reminds me of another time when this has happened. And all of that's happening that you don't really realize. Actually, we work a lot in our groups on modeling thinking like a reader to children and getting them to do the same in turn. And the EEF, which is the government body for like what looks good in teaching, has done a lot of research on this, that actually teaching these thinking like a reader skills helps children to make about 6 months progress in their reading with a short intervention. So what does that thinking sound like? And these are some of the skills that we focus on and that are recommended to focus on. So we're looking at predicting skills, we're looking at making connections, we're looking at justifying opinions, and we're looking at changing your mind. So actually, you might have thought something, but then you go back and you look at the evidence, and that might enable you to change your mind. So just a reminder, worksheets check comprehension, they don't build it. Checking does not equal building. And secondary school is where this really starts to show, although there are normally flags a lot longer before that. So actually in year 7, so many children drop behind because of their comprehension, because you're not just needed, that comprehension is not just needed in English anymore. As I said before, it's needed across all of the other subjects. You need that multidisciplinary reading. And that's why we really focus on our comprehension groups in Key Stage 2 in particular. So we have year 3 and 4 comprehension groups and year 5 and 6 comprehension groups that build the skills children need for secondary school and for exactly this sort of thing. Build these 3 skills: vocabulary, background knowledge, thinking like a reader. Then you combine that with reading fluency and you're going to have a brilliant reader on your hands. This is what we do in all of our comprehension accelerator sessions. We make sure all three of these skills are integrated into every session, and this is what makes us look different to just doing a comprehension sheet or a comprehension lesson working through a workbook. If you feel like you're ready to do this with your child, we have got slots opening up in our comprehension accelerator groups in September. And just a note on why they are groups, they are small groups, expert led groups. The reason they are groups is because in comprehension, if your child doesn't know the answer and it's one to one, it can be quite hard to pull that out of them. But actually, if you've got a group, all of the children are building on each other's ideas, listening to different children's experiences, listening to different children's opinions, different skills are being modeled to them, and we find that's the most effective way to teach comprehension. It really enables children to have an in-depth conversation about the text, bring all different opinions to the table, agree and disagree. If you think this sounds like it could be a great fit for your child, in the YouTube description there is a link to give you more information there as well. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope this has been helpful.